Yeah, I'm just okay, believe everyone is filtering in now. All right, there we go. Sorry, everyone. Me and Andy were chatting about, well, salmon and sea trout, so we got very distracted. So I'm sorry for a slight delay in starting. But I'm Sam Jones. I'm the Salmon Angler Engagement Officer here at the Angling Trust. And this is now the second one in a series of webinars, virtual fisheries forums that they're not EA funded like some of the other Angling Trust ones you may have attended. They're mostly funded by the Missing Salmon Alliance. And so, we get to just have salmon related webinars. And on this one today, we've got Andy Hurst from Lune Wyre Fisheries Association and also a trustee of Lune Rivers Trust, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And it's just bringing us through some of the work they've been doing up in the top part of the Lune catchment. I've, seen it before. It's quite inspiring talk at times, I would say. Good news story. So Andy, nothing to live up to, but try and give everyone a nice, show them what you've been doing up there and some of the nice results you've been seeing. Just one quick thing. Questions, we're happy to take questions. We'll do a Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions, you'll see at the top of your screen, there's a question and answer button. So if you just go in there, drop a question whenever you want, and we'll get to them at the end. So other than that, Andy, if you want to take it away, I'll turn my camera off now and give you the floor.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, and welcome all. I'm just going to, as Sam has said there in the introduction, tell you just what we've been doing on the River Lune to understand the impact of flooding on salmon and sea trout and what we can do to mitigate some of the effects of it. Just to kick off with, I do apologise for those that know the Lune catchment, but for those that don't, here's a diagrammatic representation of the Lune and the I would call it the pressures on the Lune. The Lune flows into Morecambe Bay, and running parallel to it for much of its length is the M6 motorway going from Lancaster up to Penrith. And it starts in Ravenstone Dale and flows down towards T Bay, where it turns and heads due south and passes close to Sedbergh, through Kirby Lonsdale, and then on through Hornby, Lancaster, and into the estuary at Heysham. You can see here the pressures at the top end of the system. There's quite a lot of dairy farming, and in the hills around the very top end of the system as well, a lot of sheep farming, a few areas where the river flows over limestone or through limestone gorges, and until it comes down to the bottom end of the river system, the midsection where it's predominantly agriculture, farming, and the bottom end through Lancaster. Lancaster isn't a big town, but historically it did contribute its fair share of pollution into the estuary waters. In terms of salmon and compliance, I'm fairly sure most of you will be familiar with how the EA measure egg deposition compliance, and for the Lune, the egg deposition target is 10 million eggs. And you can see on the right hand side how the egg deposition has been going compared to the target. And the Lune, as you can see quite clearly there, from 2009 through to 2019, and it's continued since then. There's been a steady period of decline, which I'm fairly sure that it's not unique. What we have done though on the Lune is we have tried to link some of the decline to other pressures on the system. And here I'm just going to introduce to you, I've looked specifically on the impact of flooding on egg deposition, purely from the point of view that what we have picked up is a strong link between the high flooding events and the occurrences of egg washout. Now, if you look at the flow data on the Lune for the last 50 years, what you can see, it doesn't take a genius to work out there that there's been a steady increase in flow from 1969 through to the peak there in 2015. That was Storm Desmond, this particular peak here. And if you look at that, there are several, if you will, quite large flooding events. And what I've done is looked at the salmon runs. Here are the large flooding events listed in the table there on the left hand side. On the right hand side are the salmon runs with the returns 4 years after these high flooding events. And the reason I'm looking there at 4 years after it is obviously if you get heavy washout and a loss of eggs at that stage, with the salmon life cycle being over 4 years, then it's likely to be 4 years before you see any returns. In almost all of these events where there's been a high rainfall event and a big flooding event on the Lune, if you look at the salmon returns as monitored by the Lune is an index river, and just above the estuary there's a counter, and all salmon returning to the river, the majority of salmon will pass over the counter, so we can get a fairly good accurate count of the number of salmon returning. So if you look at the high flooding event and you look at the salmon returns 4 years later, what you see there is, if you will, there is quite a strong link that the dips at the bottoms of these run peaks, if you will, are almost tying perfectly with these events. Now, if you cast your mind back to that chart, the earlier chart here of Killington flow data, this Storm Desmond that occurred at the top end of the Lune system, you can see was unique, purely and simply through the volume of water flowing over. If you look at the juvenile stock survey stock counts for the Lune following that event, then you can see straight away almost the immediate impact. This is one of the more if you will, productive becks at the top end of the Lune, Bretherdale Beck, and it was doing quite well in terms of juvenile production prior to Storm Desmond. Along came Storm Desmond and it virtually emptied it, so much so that in 2019 the salmon fry and salmon power were actually absent from the beck, and that was the first time that had been recorded in living memory. But Bretherdale Beck wasn't unique. And again, going back to the Lune being an index river, it's the EA are duty bound to do a full survey, electrofishing survey of the whole of the catchment every 5 years. And following Storm Desmond, the majority of the surveys look like this, where there was a huge peak. Now, what the next slide I'm going to show here is a model that we built, to a mathematical model that we built to try and see if we can mirror what happens on the river, because an event like Storm Desmond doesn't just wipe out one generation, doesn't just wipe out the eggs. What it does is it wipes out the fry, the par, and the smolts. And from the juvenile stock surveys, it was possible to determine that we lost 75% of all the juvenile stock just due to that one event. Now, what we aimed to try and do was to see if we could build a mathematical model to predict what was going to happen following a flooding event. And this chart, or this spreadsheet here, if you will, across the top we have the years, and down here we have the life stages and the expected survival rates at each life stage. So, for example, on the Lune, it's been possible to work out from because the EA take a sample of the run and to determine the exact composition of it, the male to female ratio. And they have worked out over the years that on average, 54.6% of the returning adults are female. So if we have a number for the fish run, then we can determine exactly the number of females returning from that run. In 2011, the number of females returning was 3,491. On average, although the fish size, the egg deposition is determined by the fish size, the average egg deposition for that period, over the period, has been 5,000 eggs per female salmon. So if you know the number of female salmon returning, you can calculate the number of eggs being deposited. So in 2011, we had 3,491 females, an average 5,000 eggs, 17.4 million eggs going down in total. Of those, only 10% will actually survive to become fry. So there's 90% of the eggs that are lost during a normal deposition will be lost. Just 10% will survive through to the fry stage. So in 2012, we had 1.7 million fry. In 2013, only of those 10% fry, only 8% will survive through to the smolt stage. So of that 1.7 million, only 130,000 have made it through to the smolt stage. So in 2013, we've got 130,000, 131,000 smolts going to sea, of which only 5% will survive to come back as grills. So we'll have a returning grills number of 6,546, and of which 10% will survive and come back as 2C winter fish. So it's possible, using this scenario, if you will, to say, right, from here in 2011, with 3,491 females, to predict that in 2014 that the growth run should be of the order of 6,546, of which 50%, just over 54%, will be females. However, what happened in 2015 was that we lost, as I said before, 75% of the eggs and the varying life stages. So that had a massive impact on the egg deposition that year, which had a massive impact on the fry production the following year in 2016, which in turn had a big impact on the number of smolts going to sea in 2017, which in turn had a big impact on the number of grills returning in 2018. So if you plot that on a chart, what you see happening after a flooding event is this. So here we have 2015, and sorry, here we have in 2015 we have a normal egg deposition, a normal adult run. In 2016, but we have the big flooding event, and what happens is that washes out the eggs, washes out the fry, washes out the par. But in 2016, we're quite fortunate that insofar as we've got one generation at sea. However, and so you get a normal deposition in 2016. But then what happens is that in 2017, because you lost the smolts that we're going to see in 2016, you've got a dip in the number of returning grills that particular year. It's made worse the following year because you've not just lost the smolts, now you've lost the fry, and you get the, if you will, the bottom of the chart occurs in 2019, when you have lost all three life stages. You've lost the eggs, the fry, and the smolts. However, in 2020, what you see is a pickup and a return to a more normal run as a consequence of the normal egg deposition that occurred in 2016. And what you see then is you see this peaking effect. You see this here, the 2021 dip, is a consequence of the poor spawning that took place in 2017. 2022 is a consequence of the poor spawning in 2018. 2023 again is a consequence of 2019, poor spawning in 2019. What it does, this model does predict, is that 2024, this year, should be slightly better, certainly on the Lune. But if you look at if you do a plot, a line of best fit over the period of time, you can say after an event like Storm Desmond, it takes the river on average about 15 years to recover for it to get back to where it was prior to Storm Desmond. That's if you do nothing about it. So I hope that's reasonably straightforward and you know, reasonable to understand. And this is what this model does, if you will. Basically, we're putting the life stages down here, years across here, and then using these figures to predict what you know, what the run will be here. And when you compare it with the actual numbers, which are down here, it's a pretty good fit. It's not far off at all. So moving on to what can we do about it? Well, what we've done on the Lune over the years, I've spent an awful lot of time up the top end of the Lune system doing red counting. And what I've noticed is that there are certain areas of the system that do ride out these storms quite well. And here I'm showing two examples. One is on a small beck called Kelbeck near Dent, and you can see here where large stones, stepping stones basically, have been placed across the beck, And what they've done is they've allowed gravel to build up behind it. And here you can see there's a trout red here, there's another trout red over the far side there. But these are very good and successful in riding out these bigger storms, because what you don't see is you don't get the gravel being washed out. Here's another great example, and this is on Ostwick Beck, which is a tributary of the River Wenning, which again is a tributary of the Lune. Again, stepping stones, and again, every year without fail, there are a sea trout and salmon spawning either side of these stones. What tends to happen is you'll get sea trout spawning upstream, sea trout, and salmon spawning in the large gravel, which tends to carry over them. And we've seen these gravel on them, you know, and the reds survive even the largest floods. It was interesting to go up there after Storm Desmond, and they were about the only area on the Lune system that did survive it. So having sort of made that connection, if you will, what we did, there was two areas on the Lune system which historically had been quite productive, two becks, Langdale Beck and Bowderdale Beck. But what we did after, when we went up after Storm Desmond, it just looked like somebody'd gone down with a bulldozer and moved all the gravel out, all the stones out, and deposited them on the bank, as you can see here. And this chap is a friend of mine, and we went up and we thought, well, can we actually do something on this beck? Can we actually repair it in a similar fashion to, you know, and create something similar to these, you know, stepping stones in these areas? And Mick's pointing to an area here where we felt that if we were to repair and put some of these stones that are on the side and put them back into the beck and maybe replace some of the gravel, then it's possible we could build or if you will, repair the damage that the storm had done and repair the riffle. Here's on the right hand side, you're looking at a beck here, Borough Beck, which again is it's an upper tributary of the Lune. But here you can see there's almost a natural line of stones on one side and almost a natural side on this side. But what we were aiming to do here was to put some stakes in and then build up the stones behind it so as to naturally collect gravel behind it. And what we did when we went back and visited these areas, we found that they'd been quite successful in terms of, we started to very quickly see trout and sea trout using them. But I also had another friend that I went up with who was most interested. He often said to me, and he was a surgeon at an oncologist at Lancaster Infirmary. His big point was that, Andy, if we do this work and we're successful, we need to create ponds. And I'm thinking, what do you mean by ponds, David? And he's saying, well, we need to give the young fish somewhere to get out of the floor. So it took a bit for the penny to drop and for me to sort of look and think, well, what's he quite getting at? And on the next slide, I'll just show it. Here we had, this is the guy I used to go with a lot, David here, but we had these ponds that were just a little distance away from the stream here, as you can see. So what we set about doing was we reconnected some of them, as you can see here. What was interesting when we did that and we went up and we visited them, these soon filled up with fry, and the term I'd use they were absolutely loaded with fry. Well, one of the other great benefits of doing this work as well is that the main food source for young fry is chironomid larvae, and chironomid larvae actually really favour silty bottoms, and you'll notice in these two, examples of ponds, they do have an element of sediment in them, and they become almost like a perfect larder for the young fish. So, as well as providing a refuge for the young fish, they also provide a vital food source. So, having set about reconnecting these, we also went about creating some side channels. Now, the purpose behind this is that a couple of former EA officers had done some work on the River Hodder system, which is a tributary of the River Ribble, and they'd done some work and created side channels. Theirs were, they dug them out, and the purpose of doing that was to try and provide semi-natural spawning sites for fish. On the top end of the Lune system, there are quite a few channels that, when the beck does come up, it will flow down. And what we did was we went about opening one or two of these with the purpose that we would be sending a flow of water over clean gravel, as you can see here. This is one that we opened it was 2019, it was before COVID. We opened this, and you can see it flowing over the side channel, just flowing nicely over clean gravel. But it has two benefits, and one of the benefits is by putting the clean water over the fresh gravel, the trout especially will make their way up this under the right conditions and will spawn in it. And just by these reeds here, there was a nice red the first year that we went up. The second benefit that you get from them, and you can see it in action here, is that you start to, by taking some of the flow from the mainstream, you do get gravel deposition on the inside of the bend, and you start getting favourable gravel build up here. Now, a little bit of a side aside from this particular story, at the back end of last season, the final Sunday of the season, I had an opportunity. I could either go salmon fly fishing at Kirby Lonsdale, or I could go the top end of the system and just make sure some of these areas are, these side channels are open and that the reds are in good order. And I went up and I focused my efforts in a small area of about 100 yards. And when I went back up in mid-November, there was 10 decent reds in that area that I'd prepared. So, and that was a real good success. But anyway, just moving on, what you tend to find is once you've done this, then sea trout will, and here's a great example of a sea trout red. Yeah, sea trout will very, very quickly occupy and move in, especially if the conditions are right. And what we've done over the years is we've monitored not just these two becks, but several other becks, and I've kept a record of the Lune system. And this is how I keep the record. Here's in the first column, column A here is the name of the beck. Column B is the exact location. And then across the top there, the year, and then salmon, sea trout counts. And you can see the two becks we've really focused on have been Langdale Beck and Bowderdale Beck. Now, prior to Storm Desmond, a good count up there would have been for salmon, would have been about 5, and for sea trout, a good count would be 20. And you can see here that 2018, 2019, 2 salmon counts, 18 sea trout counts, Bowderdale Beck, North Salmon, 6 sea trout, 2019, 2020, 1 salmon, 16 sea trout, 2020, 21, a 0 and a 5, 21, 22, 0 and a 9, but we'd really begun to work 2018, 2019, that sort of period. And in 2022, we saw the first real benefits of some of the work that we'd been doing. And when we went up in 2022, suddenly on both Langdale Beck and Bowderdale Beck, we saw an increase in the number of both sea trout and salmon reds. For sea trout, for the first time, we'd gone, we thought we'd done really well. We'd more than doubled the number of reds that were recorded up there. So we'd increased it to 50. On Bowderdale Beck, we'd increased that from a good count up there prior to Storm Desmond would have been 10. So we'd almost doubled it. Now, this last year when we went up, we hadn't just doubled it again. We recorded a total of 167 sea trout reds, 5 salmon reds, 167 sea trout reds, and on Bowderdale Beck, the number of reds had increased to the sea trout reds had increased to 78. So this was, these are the 2 charts. When I gave this talk in Birmingham and elsewhere, the first year I showed this chart on the left, and I was quite pleased that we were beginning to see some impact of the work that we'd done. However, this is it updated with last year's figures. So you can see there's been a massive improvement in the numbers of certainly the numbers of sea trout. They've been the main beneficiaries, but we've seen a not such a massive increase in the numbers of salmon reds, but they've been heading in the right direction too. Now, one of the I'm going to just bring in this chart here, because the reason I'm going to do this is one of the reasons for doing this is that we originally set off doing this to think, well, can we make just a few small changes just to try and increase the egg deposition, the survival egg deposition, and can we try and improve the fry to par to smolt survival rates? And I'm just cutting back to this particular spreadsheet that we designed, because it is quite powerful insofar as if I make a small change down here in column C, you'll see I've got the survival rates for the various life stages. What happens, after Storm Desmond, you see that effect. You see this cyclical variation in runs. Now, if I just increase the fry survival rate from 10, and I just increase that to 12%. That's all I'm going to do, is increase the chances of eggs surviving and producing more fry. What you see then is this predicts an improvement in the rate at which the river recovers. So now the river, if you can just make a small change, it's going to recover in 10 years as opposed to 15 years. If you can make a even small, another small change and increase the survival rate of the fry to the smolt stage, so you can, if you increase that to 10%. So all I've done is made a couple of small changes to the survival rates of young fish, and just look what happens to the recovery rate of the river. It's now down to 6 years, and this is pretty much tying up with the chart that I showed earlier, the recovery of Langdale Beck and Bowderdale Beck. So this just goes to show that just small changes here can make a big difference to the way that the river recovers. So just returning back to the presentation. So yeah, small changes can make a big difference, but the only problem is that for us, we're committed to repairing, doing that work. After each flood, we've got to go back up there and then do, and repair it. And there has been quite a big flood again this January, and we will be going up over Easter and starting, just checking it all out and doing whatever's necessary to repair it. And that's the downside of it. However, there is on another beck at the top end of the system, we've introduced some leaky dams, and these have proved to be really worth the weight in gold. Because if you remember if I go back much to one of the earlier slides, and I'm sorry if just bear with. If you look at this slide here, it's important to see here that this maybe it's difficult to apportion it to whether it is a result directly of climate change or whether it's a result directly of changes in land usage. I rather suspect it's a combination of both. And maybe if I get time and I have a look at the areas underneath these peaks, it's quite possible that they might point to one or the other. Because if it's likely to be changes in land usage, then I'd expect the area to, if you will, here to be roughly the same as the area under for Storm Desmond. I rather expect, though, it's going to end up being that it's a combination of both those issues. What these things do, these leaky dams, though, they're great at slowing the flow, and you can see here quite clearly fish can get underneath them. They're not a hindrance to fish passage in that respect. And here's a picture of this same dams actually working. And what they do, they don't just slow the flow. What they do is they hold all the water up at the top end of the catchment. And if you'd have seen this area before we did that work, then it was almost down to stones. A lot of it was very thin in terms of vegetation cover, but now it's full of reeds and it's full of moss, and it's actually quite difficult to walk through the moss. It's that deep. But it does have other benefits too, because it's quite peaty up the top end of the Lune. And by keeping the peat bogs wetted, we're reducing the risk of erosion. And what happens when peat dries out is that it turns to dust, and when it's re-wetted, that dust, it quite readily dissolves and forms humic acid, which in turn can run into the river. And when it does, it acidifies the top end of the streams. So by keeping it wetted, then we should, and we are actually reducing the peat erosion. It's also, it has the benefits of improving carbon dioxide retention too. It results in a reduction in the amount of silt flowing into the stream. I don't know if you can see on that particular slide there, you can actually see the bottom of the beck in quite a substantial flow. Now, that was taken on a day when a lot of the rest of the Lune system was running clay coloured. So it just, it proves that these things do work and are very beneficial. Now, as it says, it promotes regrowth of moss and reeds, further retaining water, improves biodiversity, more water, more habitat, less damage by accelerated flows. And it does, it's taking it, if you will, a lot of the damaging flow away. And the other good benefit in the way that we've gone about it is we've engaged quite a lot of the local farmers in delivering them, because there's one thing for certain, a lot of the farmers, once the becks dry out in the summer and they've got little else to do, they like to get busy in the becks and take quite a bit of the gravel and use them for filling in the roads. One of the things this has done, it's helped get them engaged, and they've actually realised that gravel is important, and also where they've tried to drain the land previously, they're now seeing that if they work at the top end of the system and slow the flow there's little need for them to actually carry out some of the damaging drainage work that they're doing lower down. Plus, obviously, engage the farmers, they get the funding also for putting them in. So the other benefit that comes with this is as well, is that if you can, this is a chart which shows the probability of smolts or adults returning against the condition of smolts going to sea. And certainly, from evidence that's being carried out elsewhere, there's certainly evidence to support that larger smolts have greater survival rate at sea. So if you can keep the young fish at the top end of the system for longer, and it's highly likely that they will actually, by the time they get to sea, they will be in better condition, there'll be larger smolts, which in turn, they will have the higher probability of returning as adults. So that's just about all I've got for this presentation. But one of the things that I will add is that quite recently I attended a presentation given by the Derwent Owners Club, and this was into a project that had been carried out on smolt tracking on the River Derwent. And the girl that had carried out the research gave the presentation, and she was making it quite clear that what she'd picked up is that there was an awful lot of smolt loss during periods of low flow, particularly if the low flow conditions occurred during the smolt run. Naturally, there was the conversation turned there to predation and the impact of cormorants and goosanders. And it did, it's probably true to say the conversation got a little bit emotive at times. You know, we need to, you know, be able to kill more of the, or cull more of the cormorants and goosanders. But when you look deeper into what she was saying, she was really saying that there wasn't, although there was evidence to support that predation was an issue, it wasn't the only issue. The issue was that when you condense quite a few of the, you know, quite a few smolts into pools and into waters where food becomes scarce and unavailable, then quite a lot of those smolts are going to die of starvation and other factors. So slowing the flow and retaining the water at the top end of the river and prolonging the runoff after floods has benefits, not just in terms of reducing the losses of smolts associated with red washout and flooding damage, but it also has the effect of keeping the flow higher for longer, and especially during the critical smolt run. So that's everything I have to say on that. So Sam, it's back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should we got some questions now, if you don't mind.
Yep.
First one, did you need permission to place the stepping stones? So earlier you were showing the stepping stones you placed for the help with gravel retention. Did that need EA permission?
Well, the EA do have, if you will, responsibility for the main stem of the river, and the tributaries on the river then fall under the protection, if you will, of the landowners. And the permissions that we needed for the work that we did came from the commoners, because the land upon which the initial work that we did was carried out on common land. So T-Bay commoners were the people, if you will, that had to be approached. And the dams, the leaky dams, yes, it was, we've done two sets, one on Raised Beck and one on T-Bay Gill. And on both of those had to seek the relevant permissions.
All right. Got another question here about the fry and par being marooned in side channels. So someone asked, what about fry and par marooned in side channels and ponds with the increase in droughts recently? And they said they spent a lot of time rescuing trapped fry and par during droughts. So I didn't know if you could comment on that at all.
Yeah, what you will notice is that quite a few of those side channels and the ponds are spring fed. Yeah, so they do retain a flow through them, and we do go up and check on a regular basis to ensure that they're connected. Yeah, and I'll be going up again at Easter, once, you know, before the low flow, you know, before the drought conditions set in, and just make sure that they are connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. So something you actively then pursue is making sure that isn't the case. Yeah.
Actively do it. Yeah.
Understood.
On that.
I was just wondering, question from me really, but if you had any thoughts on why the sea trout have increased quite rapidly, you know, and you're definitely seeing an increase in the salmon as well. That's, you know, no arguing there, but the sea trout increase is really quite drastic. So, you any
phenomenal.
ideas behind that?
Well, sea trout tend to, their life stages are slightly, if you will, shorter, yeah. And what you get as well is that if the sea trout have spawned successfully and got back to sea, yeah, and then if you will, fed and returned, they will return very much to the same area that they previously spawned, and if conditions are favorable, will spawn there again. And what we have seen, one of the interesting things, I do have a video, you've seen it, Sam. The video of that area is when we went up last back end. A lot of the fish that were up there were multi-sea winter fish, were fish ranging between 3 and 7 pound. So they've been up once, spawned successfully, got back down, yeah, and returned. So there was an awful lot that weren't maiden fish.
Understood. I mean, I've seen the video. They are big fish, the ones that you had going up there. They really are quite impressive. Question here, is there a trade-off between retaining gravel around barriers and stones and creating more problems with the silt impacting gravel quality?
Is there a trade-off? If you look at the area where we're working there, yeah, there isn't an awful lot of silt ingress. Yeah, it's not like we're working. It's quite an energetic stream is probably the word that I'd use. Yeah, and that tends to keep the silt ingress, it tends to be quite low. Yeah, and with the energy there, it tends to keep the gravel quite clean.
So it's a bit of a consequence of the type of stream that it hasn't really been a trade-off for you then.
Yeah.
Understood. Got one here from the Hodder, which is close to you, isn't it? Someone said the side channels on the upper Hodder have not at all survived since being dug out, as the required maintenance has not always been carried out. What is the experience on the Lune? You can probably speak to both the Lune and the Hodder.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I was up the Hodder 3 weeks ago, and we sent a drone up, and the 2 side channels that we dug out are still there. Yes, they probably want a little bit of maintenance, yeah, but they are there, and we're planning to go back and with members of the Hodder team to take a look and to see what we can do to get them productive once again. The main thing that we found on the top end of the Lune is if you're taking a side channel off, you have to take it off. You have to ensure that the takeoff is at right angles to the floor. It mustn't be facing upstream, because if it faces upstream, then it'll block very quickly with debris and stones and other debris. If it's at right angles, that tends to, a lot of the debris tends to wash past. Yeah, you will occasionally have to go up and just move maybe some gravel away from the entrance, but that's about it. I suspect with the Hodder that with the side channels that we have seen, that there is quite a bit of, if you will, debris across the entrance to them. And they are, if I was to build them, you know, they're a little bit too close to the main stem, so that in periods they will. So there is some work. We're going to revisit them. We've only studied them from a drone. Yeah, we haven't got close up and dirty, so to speak, but we will be doing that in the near future.
All right. We've got one here from John, who says that he has a river with a lot of feeder burns, but he's asking, how do you choose where to start improvement work? So I think you've come and looked at that on people's streams before, haven't you? I believe.
Yeah,
Where to
well,
start?
how it all on the work on the hodder is a great example, and in some respects, so is the Lune. First thing I do is I'll gather as much information as I possibly can. I'll look at I'll get the juvenile surveys from the system, and I list them by tributary, and then list them by individual site. And once you do that, it's quite possible to pick up and identify just exactly which areas have been historically good. And once you're armed with that information, you can then go and have a look at those areas which have been historically good. And quite often the reasons why they've been good become obvious and evident. And they're, in many respects, you know that those areas have been capable of supporting fish in the past. And so, you know, with a little bit of work and a little bit of restoration, yeah, they may be able to work again. So that's basically how we've gone about it on the hodder system. Looked at all the juvenile surveys, identify the areas that have worked well in the past, gone and had a look at those areas, and then listed the work that we think needs to be done, you know, the restoration work for those areas. And on most of them, it's not massive. It doesn't mean going up there with bulldozers or anything like that. A lot of this work is done by hand.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so your point there really is that the fish, if you have historical data, the fish will tell you where to start. You know,
That's
they've had
exactly it,
places.
Sam.
Yeah,
Exactly it. The fish
they'll
will
lead
tell
you.
you.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when you've done your work and you stand back and you look at it, and the fish will tell you whether you've got it right.
Yeah. Got one more question for you, if you don't mind, and it could be seen as a bit contentious, so I might end on a fun one there. Someone's asked, what are your thoughts on beavers? And I'm assuming that's in relation to leaky dams, because I believe this came in when you were talking about the leaky dams. So, you know, would you think the leaky dams any similarities to beaver dams, maybe? You know, just pose that one to you there, leave you on a real tough one.
Yeah. I was looking at some beaver dams quite recently, and there is a bit of a difference. Yes, they create lakes. If fish can get through and over them, then great. Unfortunately, from the ones that I've seen, they have quite substantial barriers. Now, if fish can get over them under the right conditions and get past them, yeah, and spawn upstream of them, then they almost become an ideal juvenile holding place. They really do, almost like a holding pond, because you will get silt settling out, and you will get, you know, chironomid larvae blooms that go with it. So they will create good nursery areas, but the problem is that can adults get over them?
Well, yeah, certainly. You know, they once coexisted, but
if they could,
maybe not an issue we want to.
If they could be built with a fish pass.
Yeah,
can
of
educate
course.
the
Yeah.
beavers.
Sadly, I don't know if the beavers normally have that sort of planning
then,
permission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, someone's actually just asked oh, I mean, now we're not really needing to have a discussion on beavers, but beaver dams impact on downstream smolt migration. I guess neither of us are beaver experts, are we? Nor are we advocating for beaver introductions everywhere. I will preface for anyone watching, but should we leave it there on the questions then? I think that's pretty good. Oh, wait, someone said, how do the timbers shown slow the flow? So I guess
Sorry?
that's the leaky dams. Someone has asked how the timbers from the leaky dams, how do they slow the flow, like in specifics?
Ah,
You know,
right,
what is,
okay. Yeah, what happens is when the river's low, the flow is unhindered. And then as the beck or the tributary starts, the water level starts to rise, it hits the first log, yeah, and it then spreads the flow. The flow, there's only a certain volume can get under it, yeah, and so the log is holding back a volume of water, and it will spread that volume of water out onto the adjoining land, and then it'll work. The flow will come round it and hit the next one down, and it's very interesting to go and see them working, because the ones at the top of the system are usually the ones that are retaining the most water. The further down the system you go, you sometimes even under quite heavy flows, you get there and you think, well, where's all the water? And it's being held higher up. A lot of it's just on the land, it's spread onto the land.
Yeah, that's where the re-wetting of the surrounding bogs really comes in, isn't it? So it spreads that flow instead of in the small channel, really widens it. Yeah. Well, I think that's all for now. So thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for coming in, taking a time out of the evening to come hear a bit about salmon with us. We hope you enjoyed it. So now if everyone can just filter out, and if you stay on, just so you and I can have a quick wrap up afterwards. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yep.
See, we've I'll help a few people leave. Yeah.
There's quite a lot on there, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, 50 people.
Right.
Nearly everyone filtered out now.
There's 3 left.
Sorry, I'm just helping the last few people. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yep.
Let me I think there's an end meeting button, so I can just stop the recording.
Yep.
And if it does end the meeting, I'll give you a ring. So we'll see. Let me hit this button here.
Yeah.